Well, the province of Gauteng has skyrocketing infection figures of COVID-19. We're likely to see a rise in the number among coastal regions. Well, noting the scourge of infections across the country, we've also had two big political events, three events actually. There was the EFF march on the SAPRA offices. There were supporters of the former President Jacob Zuma at Nkandla over the weekend defying lockdown regulations. And then before that, a protest outside the High Court in Johannesburg supporting the suspended ANC Secretary General Ace Magashule. Well, level 4 of the lockdown be enough to curb the numbers. Joined now by the vaccinologist, Professor Shabir Madhi. Professor Madhi, good evening to you and thank you for your time. We've seen these big events taking place. Are you expecting them to lead to more people being infected by COVID-19? Are we going to see the numbers shooting up even more?
Good evening, Stephen. So unfortunately, in some of the provinces, we're likely to see an escalation of the number of newly documented cases, especially at those settings where we've had this sort of large gatherings. In Gauteng, we seem to be reaching the peak of the current resurgence, which is good news, but that doesn't mean that we can let our guard down, because if we do so, we're likely to experience a further resurgence. But in some of the other provinces that are somewhat behind Gauteng with regard to the trajectory of the current wave, those sort of activities is going to lend itself to heightened transmission and an escalation of number of cases.
I mean, the big worry perhaps is people who've gone down the N3 from Gauteng to Nkandla, and then you have an event there.
Absolutely. And I think what we've come to learn about this virus, based on experience during the course of the first wave, is that a significant percentage of the population at the time of the peak of the wave are actually infected without knowing that they're infected. And they are the ones that end up transmitting the virus inadvertently. So certainly the type of movement that we've seen across boundaries, and especially when they gather in those gatherings, is going to contribute to further dissemination of what is likely the dominant variant in Gauteng, which is the Delta variant, which is at least about twofold more transmissible and infectious than the original virus that was circulating.
Do we need tighter restrictions, or do we just need better enforcement of the restrictions we have? And this is a conversation we've probably been having for a year.
Yeah, it depends what we're wanting to achieve. So even though Gauteng is likely peaking with a number of cases, the next 2 to 3 weeks, unfortunately, is going to see a further escalation of the number of hospitalizations and deaths, because it usually lags behind the number of cases in the community by about 2 to 3 weeks. Are we trying to get rid of the virus? It's not within our means to be able to get rid of the virus. And unfortunately, the single most effective tool that we've got available is really mass gatherings and avoiding those mass gatherings, and particularly when those mass gatherings are taking place indoors. Those sort of mass gatherings are recognized to be responsible for 80% of all of the COVID-19 cases, either directly or indirectly. So mass gatherings is bad news. It doesn't assist you in terms of being able to contain the spread of the virus, and it really just prolongs or worsens the current situation.
In the meantime, we have various things happening in the vaccination sphere. And if I may, you are a professor of vaccinology, Prof. We've seen the Sinovac vaccine registered by the SA Health Product Regulatory Authority, although not as much information made available on that. Do you think that's the right decision? Are you expecting that to be rolled out here pretty quickly?
Well, it seems that South Africa is promised to receive about 2.5 million doses of the Sinovac vaccine. In terms of the effectiveness of the Sinovac vaccine against the original virus, based on studies that were done in Chile, it had about 50% efficacy, which is lower than the AstraZeneca or the Pfizer vaccine against all severity illness. But when it comes to protecting against severe disease, the Sinovac vaccine against the original virus had close to 90 to 100% protection. So given that we've got limited options with regard to accessing doses as quickly as possible, I think it makes perfect sense for us to take our chance for the Sinovac vaccine. But we need to be guarded in our expectations. And that is, this is not a vaccine that's going to prevent resurgences. It's not a vaccine that's going to protect people against mild disease. It's really a vaccine that's going to assist in terms of reducing hospitalization as well as death from COVID.
Do you think then it might be worthwhile, so using the Sinovac vaccine doses, using all the doses that we can, in a couple of years' time when things have calmed down, when production levels are up to speed, we'll be able to pick and choose which are the best vaccines for long-term use by our population? Because as I understand it, it doesn't actually matter if you have a Pfizer vaccine and in a year's time a Sinovac vaccine. There wouldn't be any problem with that.
Correct. And in fact, there might be some benefit with having a combination of vaccines rather than a single technology. So as an example, the AstraZeneca vaccine followed by the Pfizer vaccine probably induces better immune responses than 2 doses of the Pfizer vaccine, especially when it comes to protecting against severe disease. So certainly we're talking of a combination of vaccines in the long term. And we need to remember that currently we're still with the first generation of COVID-19 vaccines. Hopefully in the future we'll have vaccines that become less susceptible to variants evolving that are able to evade the immune responses induced by the vaccines. And then those are the vaccines that will really assist us in being able to control resurgences. In the meantime, it's not about trying to get rid of the virus, but really about protecting people from severe disease and death.
There's another big issue, which is the vaccination program. I mean, picking up speed, getting going, police starting today. But over weekends, I mean, I think on one day this weekend, there were only 6,000 people vaccinated in the entire country. It seems that it's not moving on weekends.
Absolutely, and I got no reason. In fact, I got my second shot of vaccine over the weekend, and I was the only person at a facility that had 15 vaccinators. And that was at 10 o'clock in the morning. So do we really need to put a huge amount of effort advocating for people to come forward to be vaccinated? I think Gauteng has taken good steps in terms of not requiring people to register on EVDS and just to pitch up a vaccine. But the message, unfortunately, doesn't seem to be filtering through, that there are these vaccine sites, they're open 7 days a week. People need to come forward. If they're above the age of 50, they need to come forward to be vaccinated as quickly as possible.
Professor Shabir Madhi, really do appreciate the time as always. Thank you. Professor of Vaccinology at Wits University.